Hey everyone, tonight we're diving into something incredibly relatable, sleep. But not just any sleep. We're exploring how medieval people slept. And trust me, their habits were far stranger than anything you'd imagine. Before you get too cozy, take a second to like this video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what we do here. Drop a comment letting us know where you're watching from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see our global audience tuning in. Now, dim those lights, maybe turn on a fan for some soothing background noise, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Before electricity, TikTok, or sleep hygiene influencers, medieval folks had a nighttime routine that would baffle any modern melatonin enthusiast. They practiced something called segmented sleep, a natural two-part sleep cycle, neatly divided like a stale medieval biscuit. Here's how it worked. After sundown, most people turned in early, drifting into what they called first sleep. Then, about 4 hours later, they'd wake up, on purpose, and spend the next hour or two doing what can only be described as medieval midnight multitasking. This wasn't insomnia. It was just how sleep functioned back then. The watch period between the two sleeps was seen as practical, even social. People used this time to pray, read religious texts, tend to fires, or check on their livestock, because nothing ruins your REM cycle like worrying whether your goat is still in the yard. And yes, this was also considered the prime time for intimacy. Medieval physicians and marriage manuals noted that the body was well rested and calm during this window, which sounds like a polite way of saying, too tired to argue. So if you've ever prided yourself on waking up early to make your partner coffee, just know your ancestors set the bar very differently. The second sleep would follow this interlude, lasting until sunrise. Everyone from monks to farmers followed this rhythm. Even literary figures like Chaucer casually mentioned it. Which means, yes, even in medieval literature, people were writing about not sleeping properly. Oddly enough, modern science suggests segmented sleep might actually be more natural for humans. The two-phase cycle aligns with our circadian rhythms in the absence of artificial light. So next time you're wide awake at 2 a.m., don't panic. Just whisper, "Ah, yes, the watch has begun," and go tend to a symbolic fireplace. It wasn't until the industrial era, with factories, gas lamps, and the growing obsession with productivity, that society enforced the idea of 8 uninterrupted hours, as if sleep were sometimes sport. In the medieval world, waking up at night wasn't failure. It was the schedule, and everyone was on it, whether they liked it or not. Now, let's talk about beds, or rather, the medieval approximation of them. Today, we obsess over thread counts, memory foam, and cooling gels, debating whether a mattress is cloud-like. In medieval Europe, a bed was often just a pile of formerly living things, flattened under the weight of poor sleep and unspoken regrets. For peasants, it usually meant a straw mattress, called a pallet, literally straw or hay stuffed into a rough fabric sack, if they were lucky. If not, just straw on the floor, possibly damp, possibly already claimed by a cat. These pallets weren't comfortable, but they beat the alternative: nothing. Straw was cheap, plentiful, and great at insulating against the cold. It was also a paradise for insects, lice, and the occasional field mouse, turning sleep into an exercise in cautious stillness. If it itched, you ignored it. If it bit, you shifted slightly and hoped for the best. Wealthier families might elevate the straw mattress onto a wooden frame, which didn't improve comfort much, but slightly reduced the odds of waking up with beetles in your ear. Linens were a luxury. Most people slept in the clothes they'd worn all day. Pajamas weren't a thing, and neither was personal space. Entire families, parents, kids, maybe a grandparent, slept together, sometimes on the same straw pile. If you got too warm, you could always roll into your cousin's elbow. Nobles, of course, had proper beds. Massive wooden frames, feather mattresses, embroidered sheets, and canopies to block drafts, and hopefully lice. These beds were so valuable they were passed down in wills. Forget inheriting land. You'd inherit Aunt Matilda's suspiciously lumpy feather bed. But for most medieval folks, a bed wasn't about comfort. It was a place to avoid freezing, dodge the chickens, and maybe, just maybe, dream of one day sleeping on something that didn't rustle or squawk. When we hear nightcap today, we think of a cozy drink, maybe whiskey by a warm fire, paired with questionable decisions. But in the Middle Ages, a nightcap wasn't a beverage. It was an actual hat, a tangible, often ridiculous-looking piece of fabric designed to keep your head from freezing off while you slept. You see, insulation wasn't exactly medieval architecture's strong suit. Stone walls, drafty thatched roofs, and windows made of thin animal horn or oiled parchment did little against the cold. Central heating? That was called a dog. So to combat heat loss, which escapes fastest through the scalp, medieval people adopted the humble nightcap. These hats came in all shapes, but the most iconic was long and pointed, like something a wizard moonlighting as chimney sweep would wear. They were usually made from wool, linen, or whatever scraps of warmth could be spared without angering the family goat. For men, it was purely practical. For women, it sometimes doubled as a coif or head wrap, serving the dual purpose of maintaining modesty and covering hair that hadn't seen soap since last Lent. But beyond warmth, nightcaps carried social weight. In some regions, married women were expected to cover their heads at all times. Yes, even while asleep. The cap itself could be embroidered or dyed to reflect a family's status, because nothing screams success like going to bed with a tiny flag on your skull. In urban settings, the nightcap became a symbol of being off-duty. Answer your door wearing one, and it was the medieval equivalent of saying, "I'm not dressed for conversation," or more bluntly, "This hat means go away." Of course, nightcaps were often paired with nightshirts, long, loose tunics resembling Ebenezer Scrooge's sleepwear, minus the haunted moral lessons. Sleepwear wasn't sexy, but it was practical, itchy, and occasionally flammable. Today, the idea of sharing a bed with a stranger is limited to red-eye flights, ambitious camping trips, or bizarre Airbnb mix-ups. But in medieval Europe, this was utterly normal and not optional. Imagine you're a traveling merchant, a pilgrim, or just someone whose mule quit halfway to Norwich. You find an inn, a rarity itself, and ask for a place to sleep. What you get isn't a room, a bed, or even a clean floor. It's a spot in a bed already occupied by strangers. Medieval inns operated like human bunkhouses. Privacy wasn't expected. If a bed had space, you shared it, with snorers, sleep talkers, or people sporting a suspicious number of boils. This wasn't considered rude, it was resource efficiency. Beds often hosted 2, 3, or even 4 travelers, depending on size and social tolerance. In cities, you might end up in a dormitory-style hall with rows of beds and zero personal space. Unjudged snoring competitions ensued. Elbow territory was fiercely contested. Sometimes genders were separated, but not always. Some inns grouped guests by profession, blacksmiths with blacksmiths, clergy with clergy, thieves with alleged thieves. But usually, it was first come, first sprawl. While this sounds like a germaphobe's nightmare, it beats sleeping outdoors with wolves, rain, or the occasional peasant uprising. Worried about theft? Many travelers slept with purses tied to their belts or hidden under clothes. Others used their bundles as pillows, turning luggage into both bedding and alarm systems. Move the bag, and you'd wake up purr. The wealthy, of course, avoided this fate. Nobles traveled with entourages, camping in comfort or demanding private rooms, if the innkeeper valued their roof. In the medieval world, going to bed wasn't just about pulling up a blanket and drifting off. It was a spiritual operation, a nightly gamble where the stakes were your eternal soul. People didn't just sleep, they prepared to potentially die. Hence the popularity of bedtime prayers. Forget lavender sprays or calming podcasts. Medieval wind-down routines involved confessions, psalms, and soul-cleansing clauses, just in case you died between goodnight and dawn. The logic was simple. You could drop dead any time from illness, fire, demons, or simply being over 30 in the year 1247. So you'd better pray not for comfort, but because hell was terrifying, and you didn't want to arrive uninvited, unwashed, and spiritually disheveled. A common prayer went, "If I should die before I wake, I pray the Lord my soul to take." Sweet, right? Except it's basically a legal waiver acknowledging death as a likely bedtime outcome. Many adults had a catalog of prayers for specific threats, one for guilt, one for suspected devil in the rafters, one for plague prevention, which aged poorly. Some even prayed to saints specializing in sleeper protection, like holy bouncers guarding your soul's club entrance. The devout, monks, nuns, and anxious nobles ended their day with Compline, the final prayer service before bed. Afterward, they took a vow of silence, easy when everyone was already exhausted, underfed, and mildly afraid of the dark. Children were encouraged to pray too, partly for their souls and partly to stop them asking why the dog was in their bed again. Parents reminded them that angels were watching, less like guardian angels, more like celestial surveillance. In short, bedtime prayer wasn't about peace, it was last-minute spiritual damage control. Think of it as medieval antivirus software. You hoped it worked, even if you didn't fully understand how. In our modern world, dreams are usually dismissed as random nonsense, the result of stress, too much cheese, or your brain desperately trying to file paperwork in the dark. But in the medieval mindset, dreams were taken deadly seriously, like eternal damnation seriously. Dreams weren't just dreams. They were encrypted messages from God, saints, demons, guardian angels, or possibly that weird relic you kissed last Sunday. Some dreams were divine revelations. Others were demonic traps. Either way, you were expected to pay attention and possibly take immediate action. Theologians, monks, and self-proclaimed visionaries spent alarming amounts of time interpreting these nocturnal broadcasts. Entire manuscripts were dedicated to decoding them. Dream of fire? Might signify hell. Dream of water? Could mean purification or drowning. Dream of a goat-headed man juggling fish? Better call a priest and consider relocating. Medieval people believed your soul remained active during sleep, making dream actions potential indicators of hidden sins. That embarrassing dream about stealing bread might reveal real-world gluttony or just hunger, but better confess it anyway. Monks and nuns documented dreams like spiritual case files, sharing them with superiors. Some were celebrated for holy visions. Others were told to cut back on pre-bed onions. Of course, dreams weren't just spiritual puzzles. They were also killer plot devices. Medieval literature overflowed with dream sequences where knights encountered angels, demons, or metaphorical creatures spouting virtue-themed poetry. Dreams were basically Netflix for the Middle Ages, just with more allegory and fewer happy endings. The Church, ever suspicious, warned that not all dreams were divine. Some were demonic propaganda designed to corrupt. If you dreamed something unholy, it could mean your soul was under attack, or that you'd slept too close to those fireplace fumes again. Either way, the medieval approach to dreams was simple: interpret, confess, and when in doubt, fast for 3 days just to be safe. Today, letting pets sleep in your bed is a quirky personal choice, cozy, if occasionally smelly. But in medieval Europe, sharing beds with animals wasn't optional, it was a survival strategy. Let's be real, medieval homes weren't exactly cozy. Stone walls offered zero insulation, thatched roofs leaked, and central heating meant whatever livestock happened to be indoors. Peasant homes often doubled as barns. Chickens roamed freely, dogs curled at your feet, pigs snored by the hearth, and if you were lucky, none bit you before dawn. This wasn't about affection, though people loved their animals. It was pure thermodynamics. Body heat was currency. A large dog could prevent frostbitten toes. A cow in the corner might raise the room temperature by a critical degree, which in January felt like divine intervention. Most peasant families lived in single-room dwellings where cooking, sleeping, and occasionally dying happened alongside livestock. Kids might nestle between parents and a goat. A chicken could serve as an organic alarm clock. Hygiene? Let's not ask. The wealthy avoided barnyard sleepovers, though lapdogs remained popular not for warmth, but for flea redistribution. Some castles even had separate bedrooms for prized pets, because nothing screams nobility like a knighted spaniel with its own four-poster bed. Drawbacks? Oh, plenty. Animals are loud, mobile, and terrible at respecting personal space. A hoof to the face at 3 a.m. was just part of the medieval bedtime experience. But when the alternative was freezing, you learned to sleep through the barnyard symphony. If you've ever suffered through a hostile dorm and thought, "This is brutal," allow me to introduce the medieval monastic dormitory, where comfort went to die quietly under a vow of silence. Monasteries rejected personal space, softness, and fun with religious fervor. The typical dormitory housed dozens of monks in one stark hall, lined up like morally upright sardines. Beds were wooden planks, occasionally with a straw mattress if the abbot was feeling generous, or if it was a feast day. Monks slept fully clothed, not for modesty, but because dressing in the dark for 2 a.m. prayers was worse than sleeping in robes. Their uniforms, robe, belt, sandals, doubled as spiritual armor and terrible insulation. Cold? Layer up. Hot? Suffer. Pillows? Forbidden. Privacy curtains? Heresy. Talking? Absolutely prohibited. The rule of Saint Benedict enforced silence so strictly that groaning too loudly while rolling over could land you on chamber pot duty for a week. Snoring existed in a gray area, technically involuntary, but if it disturbed others, God might hold you accountable, or at least your cellmates would. Lighting consisted of one pathetic candle. You didn't need to see. You just needed to lie still and avoid sin. This Spartan existence was considered training for the afterlife, a way to purify the soul by denying the flesh. Some monks even slept sitting up to avoid luxury or proper circulation. Compared to this, peasant straw piles and snoring pigs suddenly seemed downright luxurious. At least the pig didn't judge you. Let's discuss something that would horrify modern sleepers: voluntarily waking at 2 a.m., not for a bathroom break or doom scrolling, but for loud, candlelit prayer. In medieval monasteries, this was standard. Monks and nuns followed the canonical hours, a rigid schedule that included matins, the first service of the day, held when even owls were debating whether to wake up. A bell would toll, rung by whoever drew the short straw, and dozens of robed, sleep-deprived souls would shuffle to the chapel, still fully dressed, because monks didn't do pajamas. Their only layering system was spiritual. Inside the freezing chapel, by flickering candlelight, they'd chant psalms and try not to collapse. Records show monks being punished for dozing mid-prayer, usually with extra chores or leading the next service. You fell asleep during matins? Congrats, you now get to host it. Matins could last 2 hours. Imagine staying spiritually engaged while your stomach reminds you that dinner was a bowl of lentils and a moral lesson, and your body is actively shutting down. Afterward, monks might return for second sleep, or in stricter orders, go straight to manual labor. Because nothing says devotion like threshing wheat on 4 hours of fragmented rest. Why this torture? The logic was sacrificial. Dedicate the night's purest hours to God, untouched by daylight temptations. It was powerful symbolism. Once you got past the numb feet, candle smoke, and Brother Ambrose's tone-deaf chanting. In today's world, sleeping alone is often seen as a luxury, a symbol of independence, peace, or simply having full control over the blankets. But in medieval Europe, solitary sleep was viewed with suspicion, considered impractical, and sometimes downright dangerous. Let's start with the basics: warmth. As we've established, medieval beds weren't exactly cozy. Stone walls and open chimneys did little to trap heat, and central heating was still several plagues away from being invented. People shared beds primarily for survival, not companionship. It was thermal desperation at its finest. Children slept piled together with siblings, parents, and sometimes even the neighbor's kid if they were visiting. Imagine a never-ending sleepover where no one asked if you wanted to participate. But beyond physical warmth, there was a spiritual dimension to group sleeping. Many believed the nighttime was when demons worked overtime. Alone in the dark, your soul became vulnerable to temptation, or worse, possession. Having others nearby created a kind of spiritual buffer zone. If something supernatural went down, at least someone would witness it, or get possessed first. For children, sleeping alone was practically unthinkable, not just for comfort, but because medieval bedtime stories featured ghosts, fairies, and wandering spirits instead of warm and fuzzy endings. These tales often ended in disappearances rather than hugs, reinforcing the idea that solitary sleep was an open invitation for supernatural mischief. Even married couples frequently shared their beds with children, servants, or random guests. Privacy simply wasn't a concept. It was a modern myth waiting to be invented. In fact, the idea of 2 people having an entire bed to themselves would have been considered either wildly extravagant or deeply suspicious. Religious communities took this further. Monks often slept communally, and being assigned to sleep alone was sometimes a punishment. Yes, in medieval logic, solitary sleep equaled opportunity for sin, while group sleep meant public accountability. So the next time you stretch out in your own bed, enjoying the silence and goat-free space, remember, in the Middle Ages, you'd likely have 2 kids, a sheepdog, and a cousin snoring in your face. If you've ever accidentally fallen asleep sitting up, in a lecture, on a train, or at the dentist's office, you know the neck pain and regret that follows. But in the Middle Ages, upright sleeping wasn't an accident. It was a lifestyle choice, particularly among the wealthy and devout. Why would anyone willingly sleep propped up? Medieval medicine offered some questionable reasons. First, lying flat was believed to disrupt digestion, lung function, and the balance of bodily humors. In an era when sneezes were thought to rearrange your soul, this made perfect sense. Upright sleeping supposedly prevented congestion of the brain, which sounds terrifying but basically meant avoiding drowning in your own phlegm. Then there were spiritual concerns. Lying flat resembled the posture of the dead, and you definitely didn't want to confuse God or attract the angel of death by mimicking a corpse. Superstitious? Absolutely. But when your local priest doubled as your healthcare provider, you picked your battles carefully. As a result, many slept semi-reclined, supported by bolsters, pillows, or wooden headboards, the medieval equivalent of a lazy boy. Nobles sometimes had beds rigged with angled frames, perfect for digesting meat pies or warding off surprise demon attacks. Monks took it further. Some orders required sleeping upright on benches or against cold walls, with only a hood to muffle the discomfort. This wasn't about comfort, it was about discipline. Too much comfort might lead to dreams. Dreams might lead to sin. And sin would definitely lead to 5 a.m. confessions. Needless to say, medieval sleep positions were less about rest and more about virtue, discomfort, and some very creative theology. Forget haunted dreams or goblins under the bed. The real monsters of the medieval night were already in the sheets, tiny, persistent, and utterly indifferent to your prayers. We're talking, of course, about fleas, lice, and everyone's least favorite bedtime companion, the bedbug. Let's be blunt. Hygiene wasn't medieval Europe's strong suit. Baths were rare, laundry was expensive, and soap was sometimes made from ingredients better left unnamed. Add straw mattresses, shared bedding, and the occasional chicken wandering through, and you've got a 5-star resort for pests. Fleas and lice were so common they might as well have been roommates. Peasants endured them daily. Nobles, despite their silk sheets, weren't exempt. Some wealthy households even employed professional nitpickers, servants whose sole job was removing lice from their master's hair and clothing. Imagine Royal Scalp Inspector on your business card. Bedbugs were the silent assassins of medieval sleep. They hid in wooden bed frames, mattress seams, and wall cracks, emerging nightly to feast like microscopic vampires. If you've ever wondered why medieval people wore full sleep attire, hats included, it wasn't just about warmth, it was pest armor. Solutions ranged from semi-effective to wildly creative. Some burned strong-smelling herbs like wormwood to repel bugs. Others slept with garlic, onions, or even ashes in their beds, methods that may have done little for the pest but definitely killed the mood. The psychological toll was real. Fleas were seen as symbols of sin, biting reminders of humanity's fallen state. Entire poems were written about them, some moralizing, others weirdly romantic, like one declaring, "Let us be united like the flea that bites us both." So while modern sleep disruptions might involve phone notifications or street lights, medieval nights were soundtracked by scratching, twitching, and the creeping certainty that something was crawling on you, because it absolutely was. We've all had restless nights. But have you ever tried falling asleep while wearing 100 pounds of iron? No? Well, some medieval knights did exactly that. Because apparently nothing says sweet dreams like being ready to joust in your sleep. To be clear, most people, even knights, didn't regularly sleep in full armor. It was hot, heavy, and about as comfortable as napping inside a silverware drawer. But during wartime or in hostile territory, sleeping partially armored was a survival tactic. A knight might remove only his helmet and gauntlets, keeping his chainmail or breastplate on, just in case enemies decided to throw a midnight ambush party. There's nothing like waking to the sound of hooves and having to suit up while still dreaming about turnips. In besieged castles, soldiers often slept with weapons at hand, swords as bedtime security blankets, shields as makeshift pillows. If the enemy breached the walls, at least you wouldn't waste time getting dressed. Priorities. Of course, armored sleep wasn't exactly restorative. Metal doesn't breathe, and chainmail loves pinching skin. Add cold stone floors, minimal bedding, and the soundtrack of snoring comrades and crackling torches, and you've got a sleep environment ranking somewhere below airport terminal on the comfort scale. Even non-combatants in dangerous regions sometimes slept in padded gambesons, quilted jackets offering minimal protection but more padding than prayer alone. And let's not forget the noise. One wrong roll in armor could clank loud enough to wake everyone and trigger false alarms about the apocalypse. If medieval life taught people anything, it was how to sleep through absolute chaos. Church bells, thunderstorms, screaming livestock, even the occasional siege. These weren't disruptions to medieval sleepers, they were just background noise. The medieval version of white noise machines. Let's start with the bells. Church bells marked every sacred moment. Sunrise, prayer times, meals, and of course the ungodly hour of matins at 2 or 3 a.m. If you lived near a monastery, your dreams were perpetually scored by rhythmic tolling. Eventually, brains just accepted it. Bells became the lullaby of an overscheduled soul. Then there were storms. With no weather apps or triple-glazed windows, medieval people experienced every thunderclap like the sky was splitting open. Roofs leaked, shutters rattled, and chimneys howled like tortured spirits. Still, people slept. They had to. Work didn't stop for bad weather, nor did plowing, praying, or fleeing Vikings. Remarkably, some slept through literal invasions and apocalyptic events. During the 14th century, people somehow kept sleeping through famines, wars, and even the Black Death. When death carts rolled by at dawn collecting plague victims, it was considered more of a grim alarm clock than cause for panic. If you didn't wake up, some saw it as mercy. Records show people sleeping through earthquakes, barn fires, and angry mobs. Sleep deprivation was constant, so bodies adapted. If you spent your days dodging mud, taxes, and damnation, you learned to sleep hard. Some even used sleep as an escape hatch. Faced with illness or fear of the world ending, a popular forecast every century, they'd just curl under a cloak, mumble a prayer, and check out. There's a dark wisdom in that. In the winter of 1692, the village of Salem, Massachusetts was buried under more than just snow. It was smothered in tension, suspicion, and a quiet terror that seeped into every timber-framed home. The Puritan settlers believed they were building a holy community washed by God and stalked by Satan. Life was already brutal. The village had recently split from Salem town over religious politics. Crops failed. Smallpox ravaged nearby communities. Wars with native tribes left deep scars. Neighbors feuded over land and inheritance. Resentment festered against outsiders, anyone who didn't conform. Then came the breaking point. In Reverend Samuel Parris' household, his 9-year-old daughter Betty and 11-year-old niece Abigail Williams began convulsing, screaming, and contorting unnaturally. They claimed invisible forces pinched and bit them. The local doctor, William Griggs, made the diagnosis that would ignite hellfire: witchcraft. That single word, witchcraft, set Salem ablaze. In a world where witches were believed to be real, satanic agents, the idea wasn't far-fetched. If the devil could infiltrate the minister's own home, who was safe? Under pressure, the girls began naming names. First social outcasts, then respectable citizens. What began as whispers would soon become screams from the gallows. Once witchcraft took root in Salem, it spread like poison ivy, slowly, then strangling everything. The afflicted girls, Betty Parris, Abigail Williams, and soon others like and Putnam Jr., grew bolder. They convulsed in court, shrieked during prayers, and claimed to see dark spirits hovering over villagers. The first accused were easy targets: Sarah Good, a homeless beggar who muttered when refused food; Sarah Osborne, who scandalized Salem by marrying her indentured servant; and Tituba, the enslaved Caribbean woman in Parris' household. Under interrogation, likely beatings, Tituba confessed to witchcraft and claimed there were other witches in Salem. Her confession opened the floodgates. Neighbors turned on neighbors. Old grudges became spectral evidence. A dead cow? Witchcraft. A crying baby? The devil's work. The fear became so contagious that defending an accused which made you suspect. Silence was survival. Logic was drowning. By June 1692, The colonial government established the Court of Oyer and Terminer to hear and determine. Its rules were warped by panic, spectral evidence, testimony that someone's ghostly form attacked you was admissible. You couldn't cross-examine a dream. The afflicted girl's theatrical fits swayed judges. Defense lawyers didn't exist. On June 10th, Bridget Bishop became the first hanged. 5 more women followed on July 19th, including the pious Rebecca Nurse, acquitted initially, then condemned when the girls writhed at the verdict. By September, 8 were hanged in a single day. Giles Corey, pressed to death with stones for refusing to plead, allegedly gasped more weight. When accusations reached Governor William Phipps's own wife in late 1692, the tide turned. The court was dissolved. Spectral evidence banned. But by then, 19 were hanged, 1 pressed, 5 dead in jail, and over 200 accused. The gallows shadow would linger for generations. While executions dominated headlines, hundreds suffered in cramped jails awaiting trials. Salem's prison couldn't hold them all. Accused witches were chained in neighboring towns, starving and forgotten. Most weren't witches or outcasts, just ordinary people caught in personal vendettas disguised as divine justice. Mary Eastie, sister of hanged Rebecca Nurse, petitioned the court with heartbreaking clarity. Stop these proceedings before more innocent blood is shed. They hanged her anyway. 4-year-old Dorothy Good, interrogated until she confessed, was jailed for 8 months, emerging mentally broken. Pregnant women weren't spared. Elizabeth Proctor, sentenced to die, was spared only by her pregnancy. She gave birth in chains. False confessions snowballed as the terrified accused named others to save themselves. Entire families were destroyed. By fall 1692, the hysteria cracked. When accusations hit powerful figures like Reverend George Burroughs, who flawlessly recited the Lord's Prayer on the gallows, doubt grew. Ministers denounced spectral evidence. Governor Phipps pardoned the remaining accused in 1693, but the damage was done. Salem would forever wear its shame. The Salem witch trials ended over 300 years ago, but their lessons still scream at us. This wasn't just mass hysteria. It was how easily fear, when legitimized by authority, can become tyranny. Ordinary people became executioners by believing too much and questioning too little. Modern parallels haunt us. Witch hunt is now political shorthand, but Salem was real, a place where courts, churches, and neighbors conspired to hang the innocent. The U.S. Constitution's protections against unjust trials grew partly from Salem's ashes. The darkest lesson? Fear unchecked is its own form of oppression. When systems meant to protect instead persecute, when accusations replace evidence, when silence equals guilt, we're all one step from Salem. The gallows are gone, but the warning remains. Justice is fragile, and history repeats when we forget. While we've explored the bizarre sleeping arrangements of medieval peasants and nobility, the nocturnal world of medieval cities held its own peculiar rhythms. Urban dwellers faced unique challenges that transformed their relationship with sleep in ways that would shock modern sensibilities. City ordinances from 14th century Paris reveal a startling fact. It was illegal to dump chamber pots out windows after dark. Why? Because unlike today's well-lit streets, medieval cities plunged into near-total darkness at nightfall. With no street lighting until the 16th century, a careless pot dump could drench unsuspecting pedestrians navigating pitch-black alleys. This created an ironic sleep disruption. The very people trying to sleep would often be awakened by the screams of someone unexpectedly baptized in night soil. The night watch system, immortalized in the call 12 o'clock and all's well, was both a comfort and a sleep disruptor. Watchmen patrolled with lanterns, theoretically keeping order, but also ensuring no one slept too soundly. Their hourly calls, required by law, functioned like a medieval version of a snooze button gone wrong. Records from London show complaints about overzealous watchmen who did call the hour with such vigor as to wake the dead, or at least the neighbors. For artisans and shopkeepers, sleep often came in shifts dictated by their trades. Bakers' apprentices famously slept in short bursts between tending overnight fires for morning bread. The 1395 London Bakers Guild regulations specifically mandated no less than 4 hours continuous sleep for apprentices, a radical labor protection for the era. Meanwhile, blacksmiths near city gates developed the ability to sleep through the constant clanging of portcullises being raised and lowered, a skill that made them the medieval equivalent of heavy sleepers near airport runways. The urban soundscape itself was a symphony of sleep disruptions. Night oil collectors made their rounds before dawn, their carts clattering over cobblestones. Street vendors selling hot night porridge advertised their wares with rhythmic chants. In larger cities like Florence, the night air carried the constant squeak of rope and pulley systems as merchants hoisted goods to upper-story warehouses, medieval freight elevators that operated when streets were clear. Perhaps most surprising were the night walkers, not prostitutes, though they certainly existed, but legitimate businesses operating after curfew. Medieval London granted special licenses to taverns near hospitals, allowing them to serve night watch physicians and midwives. These establishments developed thick straw mats on their floors where medical professionals could grab quick naps between calls, creating the first protocol rooms in history. The wealthier urban elite had their own sleep challenges. Merchant houses in Venice kept elaborate moon charts to predict when bright moonlight would illuminate their canals, allowing safer nighttime travel. Their bedrooms often featured special shutters with crescent-shaped cutouts that projected moon phases onto the floor, an elegant solution for determining whether that 2 a.m. gondola ride was worth risking. Meanwhile, in university towns like Oxford, student sleep patterns became so erratic that 15th century physicians coined the term scholar's insomnia for those who read by candlelight till their eyes fail, then sleep till noon. College statutes frequently banned excessive nocturnal studies, not for health reasons, but because sleep-deprived students were more likely to start drunken brawls at dawn. The ultimate urban sleep paradox? While cities never truly slept, their inhabitants developed an almost supernatural ability to rest amid chaos, a skill modern light sleepers staring at blackout curtains can scarcely imagine. From the baker catching 40 winks between loaf rotations to the nobleman napping through another pre-dawn vendor's cry, medieval city sleep wasn't about perfect conditions. It was about survival in a world where night never brought silence, only a different kind of noise. The medieval bedroom was far more than just a place to sleep. It was a multifunctional space where the boundaries between private and public life blurred in ways that would baffle modern sensibilities. In an era before dedicated dining rooms or home offices, the bedchamber served as conference room, banquet hall, and even courtroom, transforming sleep into an inherently social performance. Noble households took this to extremes with their elaborate bedroom politics. The 15th century Burgundian court developed an intricate hierarchy of who could witness the duke's morning rising, lever, and evening retirement, coucher. These were carefully choreographed rituals where dressing and undressing became state affairs, with favored courtiers earning the privilege to hand the ruler his nightshirt. The bed itself, often canopied and elevated on a dais, functioned as a throne by night. Records show foreign ambassadors sometimes being received in royal bedrooms, where important treaties were signed atop coverlets still warm from sleep. For the merchant class, beds represented both financial assets and social climbing tools. A 1393 London probate inventory lists a silk curtained bed valued at £12, equivalent to a skilled craftsman's annual wages. These ostentatious beds were frequently placed in ground floor parlors rather than private chambers, ensuring visitors couldn't miss the display of wealth. Some ambitious merchants even willed their beds to churches to be repurposed as altar cloths, literally turning sleep into salvation. The medieval bed's dual purpose as seating furniture created peculiar sleep hazards. Daytime visitors would often sit on the bed while conducting business, leaving behind coins, needles, or even small tools that nighttime sleepers would later discover the hard way. Medical texts from the period contain surprisingly specific advice for removing a misplaced awl from the buttock, a testament to how often people literally slept on their work. Children's sleep arrangements reveal another layer of complexity. While peasant families typically slept together in straw-lined boxes, wealthy households employed truckle beds, low, wheeled beds stored under the main bed during daytime. These were pulled out at night for servants or children, creating the medieval equivalent of pull-out couches. Some aristocratic children's beds featured special side panels with cut-out handholds, suggesting anxious parents literally barred their offspring from wandering at night. Monastic sleep culture developed its own peculiarities. The 12th century Cluniac reforms introduced silent beds, individual sleeping alcoves separated by thin partitions that allowed monks to hear but not see each other. This created an eerie dormitory where coughs and snores echoed through the darkness, but no visual contact was possible. Some orders took this further by requiring monks to sleep with their hands outside the blankets, making nighttime modesty inspections easier. The medieval bed was also a stage for supernatural anxieties. Dream crosses, two cross sticks placed under the mattress, were common protections against nightmares. In Wales, families would sometimes suspend a sieve over the bed to catch evil spirits, creating a rattling alarm system against demonic visitors. These practices blurred the line between sleep hygiene and spiritual warfare, turning every night into a potential battlefield for the soul. Perhaps most surprisingly, medieval people understood the concept of sleep disorders far better than we might assume. Physicians recognized suffocation of the womb, likely sleep apnea, in women and prescribed startlingly modern solutions like elevated pillows. The 14th century surgeon Guy de Chauliac described night terrors in children with accuracy that would impress modern pediatricians, recommending warm milk and the presence of a calm dog as therapy. This holistic view of sleep, as social ritual, economic statement, medical concern, and spiritual trial, reveals a sophistication we often deny the medieval world. Their bedrooms weren't primitive precursors to ours, but multidimensional spaces where sleep was never just sleep, but a daily negotiation with the physical and metaphysical world. The medieval approach to sleep medicine would make modern doctors both chuckle and nod in recognition. In an era before sleep clinics or melatonin supplements, physicians relied on a fascinating mix of ancient wisdom, folk remedies, and what can only be described as creative guesswork to treat sleep disorders. The 12th century Compendium Medicinae listed over 30 herbal sleep aids, from the predictable poppy extract to the peculiar boiled lettuce water. What's remarkable is how many of these remedies contained active ingredients we still use today. Valerian root, now sold in health stores as a natural sedative, was prescribed steeped in wine for those whose minds race like unchecked horses at night. Medieval monks cultivated entire herb gardens dedicated to sleep remedies, with lavender borders meant to be brushed against before bedtime to release calming scents. Sleep positions were a matter of serious medical debate. The influential Salerno school of medicine taught that sleeping on the right side aided digestion, while the left was to be avoided lest it chill the heart. Back sleeping was controversially endorsed by some Arab-influenced physicians, though Christian moralists warned it encouraged lewd dreams. The most extreme recommendation came from 13th century surgeon Lanfranc of Milan, who advocated sleeping semi-upright with the head elevated exactly 45 degrees, a position now recognized as beneficial for acid reflux sufferers. The medieval understanding of dreams as diagnostic tools was surprisingly sophisticated. Physicians like Arnaud de Villanova would analyze patients' dream content alongside physical symptoms. Vivid flying dreams might indicate an imbalance of light humors, while nightmares featuring drowning suggested excess phlegm. Treatment could range from dietary changes, less fish for the drowning dreamers, to shockingly modern-sounding sleep hygiene rules, avoiding heavy meals before bed, keeping the sleeping space neither too stuffy nor too drafty, and maintaining consistent sleep schedules, advice that wouldn't be out of place in a contemporary wellness blog. Specialized sleep aids reflected medieval ingenuity. Wealthy insomniacs used nightingales, perforated metal balls filled with aromatic herbs that were heated and placed near pillows, functioning like primitive aromatherapy diffusers. The less affluent made do with dream pillows stuffed with hops or chamomile. Some inventive souls created early white noise machines by hanging wind chimes near windows to mask street sounds. The treatment of sleepwalking reveals medieval medicine at its most paradoxical. While some physicians correctly identified it as a neurological issue, recommending gentle restraint and padded bed surroundings, church authorities often interpreted it as spiritual warfare. The 14th century manual Malleus Maleficarum recounts a case where a sleepwalking nun was cured by having her bed sprinkled with holy water and her feet tied together with blessed rope, a treatment that somehow worked, possibly through placebo effect or because the restraints prevented her from rising. Children's sleep received particular attention. Pediatric manuscripts advised swaddling infants not too tight to restrict breathing, nor too loose to permit midnight wanderings. For teething babies, mothers were told to rub gums with poppy-infused honey before bedtime, an ancient precursor to modern teething gels. Surprisingly progressive was the recommendation that children's beds be placed where moonlight could shine on them, as the gentle light promotes calm humors, a primitive recognition of light's effect on circadian rhythms. The greatest sleep challenge came for those in extreme professions. Night guards at medieval castles developed a system called watches in the shadow, where they would sleep leaning against walls with their helmets tipped forward. The visors I slid allowed them to monitor their surroundings while technically resting. Ship crews on long voyages mastered the art of seaman's sleep, 20-minute micronaps taken whenever possible, a technique now studied by NASA for astronauts. What emerges is a medical culture that, for all its occasional superstitions, recognized sleep as a pillar of health. The medieval physician's approach, viewing sleep through physical, environmental, and even spiritual lenses, was in some ways more holistic than our modern compartmentalized view. They may have blamed bad sleep on imbalanced humors rather than cortisol levels, but their insistence on treating the whole person rather than just the symptom feels strikingly contemporary. The medieval night was far from silent, and its unique soundscape shaped sleep patterns in ways that modern noise-canceling headphone users can scarcely imagine. Unlike today's constant electronic hum, the darkness pulsed with organic rhythms that alternately lulled and startled sleepers into unexpected wakefulness. Church bells dominated the nocturnal soundscape, but their patterns were more complex than simple hourly chimes. Monasteries developed elaborate nocturnal arithmetic, with specific sequences of tones marking different night hours. The Benedictine Vigilia bell used a distinctive triple ring pattern at 2 a.m. that sleep researchers now recognize as perfectly timed to coincide with the deepest sleep phase, essentially the medieval version of a snooze button. City dwellers near multiple churches experienced a cascading wave of bells across districts, creating what 14th century Florentines called the Stairway of Hours, as sound traveled from hilltop monasteries down to riverbank parishes. Animal sounds provided another layer of nighttime white noise. Unlike modern pets that sleep indoors, medieval livestock often shared living spaces. The constant rustling of chickens, snuffling of pigs, and occasional midnight crowing roosters sometimes crow at any hour, created what sleep scientists would call non-threatening repetitive stimuli. The kind of background noise that paradoxically promotes deeper sleep. Some peasant families even kept geese indoors as natural alarm systems, their honking at any disturbance proving more reliable than human watchmen. The weather played a far more intimate role in medieval sleep than it does today. Without double-glazed windows, sleepers experienced every nuance of nighttime storms. The Welsh chronicle Brut y Tywysogen poetically describes how the thatch sang under the rain, lulling children like a mother's whisper. But this closeness to nature had its dangers. Accounts from medieval hospitals note spikes and sleep disturbances during thunderstorms, with patients starting from their beds as if goosed by God's own finger. Human night activities created their own rhythms. In larger towns, the night soil men made their rounds between 1 to 3 a.m., their wooden cart wheels producing a distinctive wobbling sound that became known as the midnight gargle. Bakers firing up their ovens before dawn created pockets of warmth that attracted homeless people to sleep against their outer walls, a practice so common that some cities passed laws requiring bakers to maintain A 2-foot clear space around all heating surfaces for the prevention of nocturnal sticking. The wealthier classes engineered their own soundscapes. Castle bedrooms often featured whispering galleries, curved walls above beds that amplified the sound of approaching footsteps while muffling general noise. Some inventive nobles installed water channels beneath bedchambers, creating a constant gentle burble that masked other sounds. The 15th century Duke of Berry went so far as to employ a full-time sleep minstrel, whose sole job was to play soft lute music at carefully timed intervals throughout the night. Children's sleep environments were carefully curated, though not in ways we might expect. Lullabies from the period often contained shockingly dark lyrics. The famous Rockabye Baby, with its crashing cradle, is actually a sanitized version of a medieval original about a child falling from a tree. This wasn't carelessness, but pedagogy. The songs served as early warning systems about life's dangers. Many featured repetitive onomatopoeia like hashabai or lula lula that linguists now believe mimicked the sound of a mother's heartbeat. The most fascinating aspect of medieval sleep soundscapes was their variability. Unlike our artificially controlled environments, medieval people experienced what acoustic ecologists call sound seasons, distinct nighttime audio patterns that changed with agricultural cycles. Harvest nights crackled with the distant sounds of night harvesting parties. Winter brought the deep silence of snow insulation. Spring nights buzzed with mating frogs and castle moats. This constant variation may have prevented the habituation effect that makes modern city dwellers sleep through consistent noise pollution. What emerges is a portrait of sleep as an active negotiation with the environment rather than a passive state. Medieval people didn't expect perfect silence for perfect sleep. They developed what we now call sleep resilience, an ability to rest amid life's inherent noise. In an ironic twist, recent studies on pink noise therapy, gentle, varied background sounds, show medieval sleepers may have naturally benefited from the very soundscapes we now pay apps to recreate. As dawn broke over medieval Europe, the transition from sleep to wakefulness followed rituals far removed from our modern alarms and coffee routines. The mechanics of waking and staying awake involved a fascinating interplay of biology, technology, and social customs that shaped entire work patterns. The medieval body's natural waking process was aided by some ingenious low-tech solutions. In monasteries, the circuit or night watchman carried a special lantern with a focusing lens that could beam sunlight onto sleeping monks' faces at precisely calculated angles, an early form of light therapy now used to treat seasonal affective disorder. Wealthy households employed candle clocks, where strings embedded at intervals and wax would snap when burned through, dropping metal weights onto tin trays at predetermined times. One 14th century merchant's inventory lists an elaborate mechanical rooster powered by dripping water that would flap its wings and crow, a medieval predecessor to the clock radio. Breakfast as we know it barely existed for most medieval people. The first meal typically came after several hours of morning work, but waking sustenance took surprising forms. Night workers like bakers developed a tradition of sleep bread, leftover dough baked into hard biscuits that would soften when dipped in ale, providing immediate carbohydrates. Medical texts recommended chewing fennel seeds upon waking to clear the night's vapors from the brain, while Welsh miners carried pouches of salted herbs to nibble during their pre-dawn descents into pits. The concept of sleep inertia, that groggy post-waking state, was well recognized if differently explained. Medieval physicians blamed it on phlegmatic humors pooling in the brain and prescribed vigorous face washing with cold water, forehead massage with rosemary oil, or in extreme cases, having a servant abruptly pull the mattress off the bed. University students in Bologna were known to pay arousers, who would shout mathematical problems through their windows, an early cognitive wake-up technique. Morning light exposure was carefully managed in ways that foreshadow modern sleep science. Stained glass and noble bedrooms often featured clear panes at eye level specifically designed to catch the rising sun, while farmers' cottages positioned their smallest east-facing windows to beam light directly onto sleeping areas. The 15th century architect Leon Battista Alberti even proposed houses with rotating bed chambers to greet the sun in all seasons, but the technology proved impractical. The medieval workday adapted to these waking rhythms in unexpected ways. Court records from York show most criminal trials began around 9 a.m., not because of bureaucracy, but because that's when judges felt fully alert after their two-phase sleep pattern. Manuscript illuminators worked only until noon because, as one artisan's contract specifies, the eye loses its truth in the afternoon light, a recognition of circadian visual acuity we now attribute to melatonin cycles. For those who overslept, consequences ranged from humorous to severe. London apprentices caught sleeping past dawn might be paraded through streets wearing a sleepman's cap plastered with donkey ears. More gravely, the 1388 statute of Cambridge fined entire villages if their night watchmen were found asleep, a law that persisted because, as one bailiff noted, it is easier to hear a purse open than an eyelid close. The most extreme waking practices belonged to sailors and soldiers. Viking crews reportedly used a watchstone, a freezing rock placed inside the tunic that would become unbearably cold when wet, preventing deep sleep during night watches. Knights on campaign slept with their armor's elbow joints filled with peas that would press painfully into the skin if they didn't rise at first light. These brutal methods speak to the life-or-death importance of wakefulness in certain professions. Children's waking routines reveal medieval parenting philosophies. Rather than abrupt awakenings, many households used gradual methods like opening shutters incrementally or having older siblings sing increasing louder. A 13th century child-rearing manual from Salerno advises waking children by gently stroking their feet, so the soul may return from its night travels by pleasant paths, a poetic approach modern sleep experts endorse as less stressful than alarms. The contrast with modern waking life couldn't be sharper. Where we combat sleep inertia with caffeine and screens, medieval people leveraged sunlight, herbs, and social accountability. Their solutions, from light-projecting monks to pea-filled armor, show a world where wakefulness was earned rather than assumed, where the transition from sleep to awareness was treated as a physiological event worthy of careful management. In rediscovering these lost rhythms, we might find wiser alternatives to our current jarring awakenings. The medieval approach to seasonal sleep adaptations reveals a profound harmony with natural rhythms that modern life has largely abandoned. As the Earth tilted through its annual cycle, sleep patterns shifted in ways that would baffle today's artificially lit societies and might hold lessons for our current sleep crisis. Winter's long nights transformed sleep into something closer to hibernation. Peasant families in northern regions practiced winter co-sleeping with startling efficiency. Multiple generations would share not just beds but body heat in carefully arranged sleep stacks that rotated positions nightly to ensure even warmth distribution. Icelandic sagas describe specialized night wardens who monitored these sleeping arrangements to prevent accidental suffocation, particularly when infants were involved. The wealthy achieved similar results through architectural ingenuity. Castle bedchambers in colder climates featured sleeping alcoves built directly into exterior walls, creating an insulating air gap that kept beds warmer than freestanding furniture could. Summer brought its own radical adjustments. In Mediterranean regions, the concept of the siesta was far more extreme than its modern incarnation. Notarial records from 14th century Valencia show businesses legally required to close from noon till 3 p.m. during summer months, with correspondingly later bedtimes. The hottest regions developed night gardens, outdoor sleeping spaces with water channels running beneath elevated cots, creating primitive evaporative cooling. Venetian merchants took this further by sleeping on warehouse rooftops where sea breezes could reach them, a practice so common that the city passed laws against overcrowded rooftops endangering the tiles. The agricultural calendar dictated sleep schedules with precision we'd now consider obsessive. Harvest season saw entire villages adopting segmented sleep on demand. Workers would nap in shifts in field-side sleep huts, their rest periods timed to the movement of the sun rather than clocks. Spring lambing season required shepherds to master pastoral polyphasic sleep, taking multiple 20-minute naps throughout the night between checking flocks. These practices weren't just practical, they were codified in manorial records with specific terminology: the after-reaping sleep, a 2-hour post-harvest nap, or the moon-dozed watch, light sleep during brightest lunar phases. Religious observances also shaped seasonal sleep patterns in ways that blur the sacred and physiological. Lenten sleep restrictions, limiting nighttime rest to encourage prayer, coincided perfectly with the increasing daylight of early spring, making the ascetic practice slightly less grueling. Conversely, Christmas celebrations included holy drowsing, where congregations would nap during extended midnight masses, a practice tacitly approved by clergy who recognized winter's biological pull toward longer sleep. Children's sleep received special seasonal consideration. Summer allowed for later bedtimes and star-watching sleeps where children would doze outdoors under parental supervision, a practice believed to strengthen their constitutions. Winter saw the creation of storytelling beds, where elders would keep children awake longer with tales, compensating for the season's reduced social interaction. Medical texts noted that children naturally slept longer in winter and recommended adjusting their meals accordingly, an early recognition of circadian nutritional needs. The most fascinating adaptations belong to travelers and migratory workers. Pilgrimage guides advised adjusting sleep schedules weeks in advance to match destination latitudes. Medieval sleep maps from trading centers like Bruges showed optimal stopping points where inns were spaced according to typical daylight travel hours, essentially a 14th century version of planning rest stops around your biological clock. Modern sleep science is just beginning to appreciate the wisdom in these seasonal adjustments. Recent studies on social jet lag, the strain caused by ignoring natural seasonal sleep variations, suggest medieval people may have been more attuned to their biology than we are. Their annual sleep migration between summer's late nights and winter's early bedtimes created a gentle, natural rhythm that our artificial lighting and rigid work schedules have overridden. As we struggle with epidemic sleep deprivation, the medieval example offers an alternative vision. Sleep is a fluid, evolving practice that respects both the turning earth and human physiology. Their annual dance with darkness and light wasn't primitive. It was a sophisticated adaptation we're only now rediscovering through chronobiology research. Perhaps the greatest medieval sleep innovation was this very flexibility, this willingness to let the seasons shape rest instead of fighting against them.